How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to try something a little bit more experimental. I'm going to share a sort of waking dream or vision that I had about a year and a half ago at this point. There are two types of these visions that I experience. One is a sort of voluntary one where I engage in active imagination and scenarios present themselves, and then I engage with those scenarios, and it creates a sort of story that I can analyze later on and learn more about myself. The second is a sort of intrusive kind, which happens when I become dissociative or under states of extreme duress. I will just sort of teleport to another place. I don't know how else to explain it. This is actually kind of a combination of the two because it's something that happened. It started voluntarily, but then it just sort of escalated from there, and I was sort of paralyzed in awe of what was happening before me. So this is actually one of the shorter ones that I've had, but it's still going to take some time to go over. So the way that I record these is I will hit record on the voice recorder of my phone, and I will just sort of describe what I'm seeing and hearing and feeling and thinking. And then later I will transpose that into a document, or I will write it down in a journal so that I have multiple mediums just in case. So yeah, let's get into it. Grab some popcorn. It's story time. This is entitled The Sidereal Stranger. Sidereal referring to the stars and the celestial space. Here we go. While reading about Jung's childhood dream of the man-eater, I began envisioning the surreal landscape. Suddenly, I found myself before the same beast, and watched as I began to slice my finger and press my blood into its flesh. At this point, the entire thing began to tremble, and black smoke began billowing out of its pores as I stood frozen in awe. As the noxious smoke filled the room, I began to inhale it and become momentarily blinded. I began to see a starry night sky, but it was billowing like a wind-blown cloth. Upon noticing this, I realized it was enshrouding a very ancient-looking man. He was wearing the sky like a wizard wears a robe. His hair and his beard were disheveled, and he was muttering about having lost something or someone dear to him. Only by igniting the sky would they ever become reunited. I was bewildered and confused. He then waved his mighty hand, gesturing toward another sky above him. Then, with a second motion, he pointed to a small blue bird that seemed to be caught in some sort of bramble below. He let out a cry of despair as he reached down and grabbed me, tossing me into the thicket of thorns as well. I began struggling to free myself, but it only served to tire myself and terrified the poor blue jay beside me. Suddenly, a massive wind picked up, and with it I heard a voice echoing loudly in my mind. Only one who was drowned in the flood may carry the torch. At this moment, a loud crack of thunder was followed by a torrential downpour. Before I knew it, I was consumed by a sense of dread. I felt myself becoming weaker and weaker, while the water was collecting faster and faster until I could no longer discern to what degree I was lost in its depths. Darkness eventually enveloped me, yet again. Panicking, I thrashed about. Finding nothing but thorns. Fearing that I would become a vessel of this darkness, I plunged one of the giant thorns into my chest. I felt agonizing pain, and then a shift in the flow of water around me. Still encased in a void of utter blackness, I could make no assumptions as to what had caused this. A brief moment passed, and I began to perceive a faint light overhead. I could finally see the sky above me, piercing through the now receding waters. My head was finally freed from the onslaught of ocean depths. My shoulders, then my waist were next. I immediately began to scan my environment, finding an enormous gaping hole in the earth just a few 100 feet away. Apparently the water had drained into it, displacing the vines and freeing me from the clutches of an uncertain fate. Then I remembered the tiny bird that had been trapped also. I turned around only to find that it had drowned, and it was incredibly bloated. I gently squeezed it, attempting to remove the water from its lungs and stomach. Slowly, a golden sap began to excrete from its mouth. Again, the loud voice boomed within my mind. Behold, the medicine of the fool and the poison of the wise, that you should imbibe it and know all worlds before. Running my finger across the small animal, I wiped some of the substance up with my finger and applied it to my wound. A massive cracking sound. Then the sense of ripping in half from the top down. Blessed is he who believes in his grief. The voice chimed within my head. I began to rise above my previous awareness, and then, looking down, saw a massive crack in my skull. Mystified, I began to draw my gaze upward. The sky ignites into an amethyst flame. It rapidly deteriorates to reveal another scene, an enormous mouth with an eye inside of it. Its iridescent iris was absolutely astonishing. Its lips were a pale blue, as if deprived of oxygen or warmth. I immediately knew that this was the source of the voice in my head somehow. The stranger in the sidereal robe cried and bellowed toward the skies, "My love, why have you hidden yourself from me?" The echoing voice replied, "Because you would forget yourself, leaving countless ages to the darkness. Leave thy robe resplendent to the fool who was wise enough to sacrifice his future, so that we may come to rescue the past." The stranger removes his garment, and it glides down to me, blanketing me with its beauty. I become increasingly aware of the terrestrial gravity and the physical world surrounding me. I find myself sitting on the floor of my study, shaking in a cold sweat. That's it. That's the vision. I will leave the interpretation up to you. I know it's very meaningful to me, but anyway, if you like this, leave a comment and maybe we'll do more in the future.